3 days before my wedding, I stood barefoot in my kitchen at almost midnight, staring at a tiny black recorder beside my engagement ring. Joseph was upstairs asleep. The invitations had gone out months ago. My dress was pressed and hanging in the guest room. 112 people were expecting to watch me marry the man I had trusted for more than 3 years, and I was about to hide a recording device in his coat. I remember thinking that decent women did not do things like this. Mature women asked questions, they communicated. They did not spy on the man they planned to marry. Then I remembered the sentence I had heard Joseph say in the garage 2 nights earlier. "Just give me until Saturday. Once we're married, everything changes." That sentence was the reason I picked up the recorder. My name is Victoria Baker. I was 43 years old then, old enough to know that marriage did not magically fix anything, and young enough to believe I still had time to get it right. Joseph and I had met 3 years earlier at a charity dinner outside Charlotte, North Carolina. I had almost skipped the event because I had worked a 12-hour day and wanted nothing more than sweatpants and a quiet house. Instead, I let a co-worker talk me into going. Joseph was standing near the bar when we met, holding 2 glasses of sparkling water, because he had offered to get one for an elderly woman who had difficulty walking. That was Joseph. Or at least that was the Joseph I knew. He was thoughtful without making a show of it. He remembered birthdays. He called my mother on Sundays. He knew I hated driving in heavy rain and would text me when storms were moving through the area. When my furnace died one January, he showed up with 2 space heaters before I even finished calling the repair company. After my first marriage ended, I had spent nearly 8 years convinced I would never marry again. Joseph never pushed. That was one of the reasons I eventually said yes. Our wedding was supposed to be small by his standards and large by mine. Family, friends, co-workers, a few people from his construction firm, dinner afterward at an old brick event space near the city. Everything had been paid for. Everything had been planned. And until 6 weeks before the ceremony, I had felt surprisingly calm. The changes in Joseph were so minor at first that I almost felt embarrassed noticing them. He started taking more calls outside. Nothing dramatic. His phone would ring during dinner, he would glance at the screen, then say, "I need to grab this," and walk onto the back patio. He began having more evening meetings. Joseph was a sales director for a commercial construction company, so late appointments were not unusual. Developers, contractors, property owners, they worked strange hours when deals were moving. Still, there was something different about the way he explained those meetings. Too much detail sometimes, not enough at others. "I'm meeting Tom about the Rock Hill project." "Which Tom?" "The contractor." "What contractor?" "The guy I told you about." Maybe he had told me. Maybe I simply did not remember. That became my explanation for almost everything. I was tired. I was stressed about the wedding. I was reading too much into normal behavior. Then Joseph began asking questions about my house. The house was not impressive enough for anyone to call it an estate. It was a 3-bedroom brick home on a quiet street with an old maple tree in front, and a kitchen I had remodeled 1 cabinet at a time. I had bought it nearly 15 years earlier, long before Joseph entered my life. Most importantly, the mortgage was almost gone. One Sunday morning while we were drinking coffee, Joseph asked, "You're still thinking about adding me to the house after we get married, right?" I looked over my mug. I said I'd talk to an attorney about what makes sense. He smiled. Of course. There was nothing threatening in his voice. He reached across the table and touched my wrist. "I just don't want us thinking like roommates after we're married. Yours and mine and yours. At some point it should become ours." That sounded reasonable. In fact, part of me agreed. But the question kept coming back. A few days later, he asked whether I had ever considered refinancing. Then he asked how much equity I had. Then, while we were reviewing our future monthly budget, he casually asked whether my name was the only one on the deed. Every question had an innocent explanation. Together they began to feel like footsteps in a hallway. I did not accuse him. That mattered to me. I had spent years after my divorce rebuilding not only my finances but my judgment. I did not want fear from an old marriage poisoning a new one. So I kept watching. The moment that finally changed things happened on Tuesday evening. I came home early because a meeting at work had been canceled. Joseph's SUV was in the driveway, but he was not inside. I heard his voice through the door leading to the garage. He was speaking quietly. "No, I understand." A pause. I said, "I'll handle it." Another pause. Then his voice hardened. "Just give me until Saturday. Once we're married, everything changes." I opened the garage door. Joseph turned so quickly that his shoulder struck the side of the workbench. He ended the call. For half a second neither of us spoke. Then he smiled. "Hey, you're home early." Who was that? Work. He did not hesitate. That bothered me more than hesitation would have. "What's happening Saturday?" "Our wedding." He laughed and kissed my cheek. I stood there smelling sawdust motor oil and the faint trace of his aftershave. "What changes after we're married?" He looked at me for a second, then grinned. "Everything, hopefully." It was exactly the kind of answer Joseph gave when he wanted something to sound charming instead of specific. I told myself to drop it. I almost did. The next night his phone lit up while he was in the shower. I was not trying to read it. The phone was charging beside the kitchen sink while I rinsed 2 wine glasses, but the screen illuminated directly in front of me. One message: "Claire, we need to settle this before you marry her." My hand stopped under the running water. Claire was Joseph's ex-wife. According to him, they had barely spoken since their divorce 6 years earlier. When Joseph came downstairs, I asked whether he had heard from her recently. His expression barely changed. "Claire." "Yes." "Not really. Why?" I dried the same glass twice. "No reason." He kissed the top of my head and went into the living room. That night, after Joseph fell asleep, I sat at my kitchen table and ordered a small digital recorder from a nearby electronics store for pickup the next morning. I hated myself a little for doing it. But by then I had reached a strange place where the truth frightened me less than the possibility that I was about to marry someone while deliberately ignoring my own instincts. The following morning, Joseph showered while I stood in the mudroom, holding his navy wool coat. My hand shook once. I stopped. I nearly put the recorder back in my purse. Then I thought about Claire's message. "Before you marry her." I slipped the device deep into the inner pocket and pressed record. Joseph came downstairs 10 minutes later, knotting his tie. He picked up the coat. "Big day?" I asked. "Couple meetings." He leaned down and kissed me. Then he smiled. "3 more days, Mrs. Baker?" I smiled back. The front door closed behind him. And for the first time since accepting his proposal, I was relieved that I was not his wife yet. For the next several hours, I tried to behave like a woman who had not hidden a recorder in her fiancé's coat. I answered emails. I confirmed the seating chart with the venue. I called my mother to remind her that the ceremony started at 4, not 4:30. I even spent 20 minutes arguing with the bakery because one of the dessert trays had been entered incorrectly on the invoice. Normal things? Wedding things. But underneath every ordinary conversation was one thought I could not shut off. What am I going to hear when he comes home? By noon, I had nearly convinced myself that I would hear nothing. Joseph had always been good to me in ways that were difficult to fake for 3 straight years. When my mother had cataract surgery, he drove her home because I was stuck at work. When I was hospitalized overnight with food poisoning, he slept in a plastic chair beside my bed even after I told him to go home. People did not usually build a whole life out of lies. At least that was what I kept telling myself. Around 2 that afternoon, Joseph texted me. "Still good for dinner tonight?" We were supposed to meet at a small Italian restaurant near our house, one of those places where the owner remembered what wine Joseph liked and always gave us the corner table. I stared at the message before answering. "Of course." Then another message appeared. "Love you, almost there." I knew he meant the wedding. I put the phone face down. That evening, Joseph arrived at the restaurant before I did. He was sitting at the table with his jacket over the back of the chair and a glass of red wine in front of him. For one terrible second, all I could think about was the recorder. Was it still in the coat? Had he found it? His face gave me nothing. He stood, kissed my cheek, and pulled out my chair. "You look tired." "Long day." "That makes 2 of us." He smiled and lifted his glass. "To surviving wedding week." I forced a laugh. "To surviving." Dinner was almost painfully pleasant. We talked about guests arriving from Raleigh and Richmond. Joseph made a joke about his cousin probably being late to his own funeral someday. I told him my mother had already changed her shoes twice because she was worried about the gravel path outside the venue. Then, halfway through the meal, Joseph reached into the leather briefcase beside his chair. I almost forgot. He placed a slim folder on the table. "What's this?" "Some financial stuff we need to look at eventually." "Eventually. After the honeymoon is fine." I opened the folder. The first page was from a bank. The next was an account form. Then another document mentioning beneficiary information. I looked at him. "Why are you bringing this up now?" He shrugged. "Because once we're married, there are things we should clean up. Accounts, insurance, the house." There it was again. The house. I kept my voice neutral. "What about the house?" "Nothing urgent." Joseph cut a piece of chicken and continued as if we were discussing paint colors. I just think we should eventually get everything structured together. Maybe refinance if the numbers make sense. Put both names where they belong. I closed the folder. You've thought about this a lot. Of course I have. He smiled. We're getting married, Victoria. I'd be worried if I hadn't thought about our future. It was a good answer. That was the problem. Joseph always had good answers. I slipped the folder into my bag. Let's deal with it after the wedding. Absolutely. He did not push. For the rest of dinner, he seemed relaxed enough that I began feeling foolish again. Maybe Claire's message was about some leftover paperwork from the divorce. Maybe the phone call in the garage was connected to wedding insurance, a business contract, anything. By the time we drove home separately, I had almost decided not to listen to the recording at all. Then Joseph pulled into the driveway behind me and stayed in his SUV. I went inside. 5 minutes passed. Then 10. From the kitchen window, I could see him sitting behind the wheel with the interior lights off. When he finally came in, I was putting leftover pasta in the refrigerator. Everything okay? Yeah. Why were you sitting outside? He loosened his tie. Had to return a work call. I looked at him. At 9:30. Clients don't stop having problems because I'm eating dinner. There was a faint edge in his voice. Then it disappeared. He kissed my forehead. Sorry, I'm tired. So was I. But I was also paying attention now. The next morning, Joseph told me he had one final meeting before taking several days off for the wedding and honeymoon. Should be home by 6, he said. He wore the navy coat again. I watched him leave without saying anything. At 6:15, he texted. Running late. Contractor issue. Don't wait for dinner. At 7:40, I reheated soup. At 8:12, I called. No answer. At 8:36, he texted again. It's still tied up, sorry. Joseph came through the door at 9:47. He looked tired but not nervous. Disaster, he said, dropping his keys into the bowl near the door. What happened? Scheduling issue. One of the subcontractors may have screwed us on a deadline. He hung his coat in the mudroom. I studied his face. Who were you meeting? Evan, then Mike joined us. The names came quickly. Too quickly. Was Claire there? Joseph froze for less than a second. It was so brief I might have missed it a month earlier. Claire. Your ex-wife. No. He gave a small laugh. Why would Claire be at a construction meeting? I don't know. He looked at me more carefully. Where is this coming from? Nowhere. I'm tired. So am I. He stepped closer and put both hands on my shoulders. 48 hours, Victoria. Then all of this wedding stress is over. I looked at him. Yeah, 48 hours. Joseph went upstairs to shower. I stood in the kitchen for nearly a minute before walking into the mudroom. His coat hung exactly where he had left it. My fingers found the recorder deep in the inside pocket. I carried it to the kitchen table and stared at it. 4 hours and 37 minutes. That was how much audio it contained. I put in my earbuds. The first 20 minutes were almost enough to make me stop. Car noise. Sports radio. Joseph talking to someone about delivery schedules. A coffee order. A long stretch of silence. Then a meeting. Numbers, building materials, deadlines. Nothing personal. Nothing suspicious. By the 40-minute mark, shame began crawling up the back of my neck. What was I doing? I was 2 days away from marrying a man I claimed to trust, sitting alone in my kitchen, secretly listening to his workday. I reached for the recorder to turn it off. Then I heard a car door shut. Footsteps. A woman's voice. You're late. My hand stopped. Joseph answered. I know. The woman spoke again. You said this would be settled before the wedding. My stomach tightened. Joseph's voice dropped. I said I'm handling it. Then she asked the question that made every sound in my kitchen disappear. Does Victoria know? There was a pause. Joseph answered quietly. No. I stopped the recording. For several seconds I could hear nothing except my own breathing. Because I knew that woman's voice. I had heard it once before years earlier when Joseph played an old voicemail for me during an argument over his divorce. It was Claire, his ex-wife. And whatever they were discussing, Joseph had just admitted that he was hiding it from me. I sat at the kitchen table with my finger resting on the pause button. Upstairs, water moved through the pipes. Joseph was still in the shower maybe 20 feet above me while his recorded voice sat inside my earbuds telling another woman that I knew nothing. For one reckless moment I wanted to run upstairs and demand an explanation. Instead I pressed play. Claire spoke first. You told me this would be handled before the wedding. It will be. When? Soon. That isn't an answer, Joseph. He exhaled sharply. What do you want me to say? I want you to tell me you have a real solution. I expected the next words to expose an affair, a hotel, a secret relationship, maybe some promise Joseph had made to Claire while planning a wedding with me. But none of that came. Instead, Claire said, "The lender called me again." I straightened in my chair. Joseph lowered his voice. "I told you not to talk to them. My name is still attached to this mess. I can talk to whoever I want." What did they say? The same thing they've been saying. They want a restructuring proposal, or they're going to start pursuing the guarantees. There was silence. I removed one earbud and stared toward the staircase. Guarantees. Lender. This wasn't about sex. It was about money. I put the earbud back in. Claire continued, "I'm not letting your company destroy my credit again. It's not my company anymore." Then why am I sitting here talking to you about its debt? Joseph said something too quietly for the recorder to catch. Claire answered immediately, "No, don't do that. Don't rewrite history because you need something from me." My stomach tightened. Joseph had told me about the business. Years earlier, during his marriage to Claire, he had co-owned a small commercial development company. According to Joseph, it had failed during a bad market and everything connected to it had been resolved in the divorce. He had said those exact words. Everything was resolved. I kept listening. Claire mentioned a number. At first, I thought I had heard it incorrectly. Then she repeated it. $186,000, Joseph. I paused the recording again. $186,000? I knew Joseph's salary. I knew roughly what he had in savings because we had discussed retirement planning. He was comfortable, but he did not have $186,000 sitting around. I replayed the last 30 seconds. "Same number," Claire asked. "Where exactly are you supposed to get collateral for that?" Joseph did not answer immediately. I could hear traffic somewhere in the background. A horn. Then the scrape of what sounded like a chair. Claire spoke again. "Joseph." His answer came quietly. "Victoria's house." My entire body went still. Not our house. Not the house. Victoria's house. Mine. The house where I was sitting. The house I had bought when I was 28 years old, with a down payment that had taken me nearly 4 years to save. The house where I had replaced the roof, remodeled the kitchen, refinished the floors, and written mortgage checks through layoffs, a divorce, and every ordinary financial emergency adulthood had thrown at me. Joseph had contributed to groceries and utilities after moving in. He had not bought the house. His name was not on the deed. And now I understood why he had suddenly become interested in its equity. Claire sounded stunned. "Her house? It has plenty of equity." "That wasn't my question." "I know." "Did she agree to this?" Another pause. Then Joseph said she will after the wedding. My fingers tightened around the recorder. Claire gave a short, humorless laugh. "You're kidding." "No." "Joseph, does she even know about the Baker commercial debt?" "I'll explain it. When the timing is right, you're getting married in 2 days." "I'm aware of that." Claire's voice changed, less angry now, almost tired. "And if she says no?" Joseph was silent for perhaps 3 seconds, then he laughed softly. It was not an evil laugh. There was nothing theatrical about it. "That made it worse. Once we're married, she won't walk away over paperwork." I stopped breathing for a moment. There it was. Not an affair. Not another woman. A calculation. Joseph believed marriage would change the leverage between us. He believed that after I stood in front of our families, made vows, combined parts of our lives, spent thousands on a ceremony, and introduced him as my husband, saying no would become harder. Claire apparently understood the same thing. "That's a rotten thing to do to someone," Joseph scoffed. "Don't pretend you care about Victoria." "I don't know Victoria." "Exactly. But I know what it's like to be married to you." Silence followed. I leaned back in my chair. That sentence landed differently from everything else. Until then, Claire had existed in my mind mostly through Joseph's version of their marriage. Difficult, bitter, controlling about money, unable to let go of old grievances. Suddenly, I wondered how much of that story I had accepted because Joseph had told it calmly. Claire continued, "I signed things because you told me they were temporary. I trusted you because we were married. I'm still dealing with the consequences." That was different. "You always say that." "I'm not asking Victoria to take on the debt." "You're planning to use her house to secure it?" "With her permission." Claire laughed again. "You mean after you wait until she feels too committed to refuse?" Joseph's chair scraped. "We're done here." "No, we're done when you give me something in writing that protects me." The recording continued, but I barely heard the next several minutes. I took the earbuds out. The refrigerator hummed behind me. Somewhere outside, a dog barked twice. The house looked exactly the same as it had an hour earlier. But the life I thought I was building inside it had changed completely. I heard footsteps upstairs. Joseph. I quickly removed the earbuds and slipped the recorder into the pocket of my cardigan. A few seconds later, he walked into the kitchen wearing gray sweatpants and a t-shirt, rubbing a towel through his wet hair. There you are. I looked up. Here I am. He opened the refrigerator. You hungry? I could make something. No. He glanced at me. You okay? That question almost broke my composure. I looked at the man I was supposed to marry in less than 48 hours. He looked familiar. That was the frightening part. Nothing about his face had changed. I'm just tired, I said. Joseph came over and kissed my forehead. Get some sleep, tomorrow's gonna be crazy. He went upstairs. I waited until I heard the bedroom door close. Then I pulled the recorder out again. I replayed one sentence. Once we're married, she won't walk away over paperwork. Once. Then a second time. I did not need a third. I removed my engagement ring and placed it on the table. The clock on the microwave read 11:47 p.m. Our wedding was less than 36 hours away. I picked up my phone. There was one person I trusted to tell me what I needed to hear rather than what would make me feel better. Daniel Price had been my friend for almost 15 years. He was also an attorney. I found his name and pressed call. He answered on the fourth ring, his voice thick with sleep. Victoria. Daniel, I'm sorry. A pause. What happened? I looked at the ring sitting beneath the kitchen light. I need you to tell me how to protect my house. Daniel was fully awake now. From whom? I stared toward the staircase. From the man I'm supposed to marry Saturday. Daniel did not tell me to calm down. That was one of the reasons I had called him. He listened while I explained what I had heard, interrupting only to clarify details: the amount of the debt, whose name was on my deed, whether Joseph and I had already opened joint accounts, whether I had signed anything related to refinancing or collateral. When I finished, Daniel asked, "Have you signed any of those papers Joseph gave you?" No. Anything else in the last 6 months? Loan applications, guarantees, a power of attorney? No. Good. The word came out with enough force to make me sit straighter. What does that mean? It means don't sign anything. I looked toward the staircase. Can Joseph do something to my house just because we get married? Not the way you're describing it. Marriage doesn't magically put his name on property you already own. But Victoria, that's not what concerns me. What does... That he apparently knows he needs your cooperation. That sentence clarified everything. Joseph did not have some secret legal trick that would make my house his on Saturday afternoon. He needed me, my signature, my consent, and according to the recording, his strategy was to ask for those things only after marriage made refusal emotionally harder. Daniel told me to meet him at his office at 8:30 the next morning. Bring every document Joseph gave you. What about the recording? Keep it. Don't send it around. We can talk about that separately. I barely slept. At 7 the next morning, Joseph stood at the bathroom mirror shaving while I dressed. Where are you going this early? The florist. He looked at me through the mirror. Problem, apparently. That was my first deliberate lie to him. I disliked how easily it came out. Maybe that was another thing betrayal did. It turned ordinary conversations into performances. Daniel's office was on the 3rd floor of a brick building in South Charlotte. When I arrived, he already had coffee waiting. I handed him Joseph's folder. He read quietly for several minutes. These aren't inherently alarming, he finally said. My heart sank slightly. Then I'm overreacting. I didn't say that. He turned one page toward me. This is beneficiary paperwork. Normal for people getting married. This is information about opening a joint account. Also normal. Then he tapped another sheet. This is where I start asking questions. The document referenced a business entity called Baker Commercial Holdings, LLC. I recognized the name immediately. That's his old company. I thought you said it closed. Joseph told me it did. Daniel turned his monitor toward himself and searched North Carolina's public business records. Less than a minute later, he leaned back. It hasn't. He rotated the screen. There it was. Baker Commercial Holdings, LLC. Status active. I stared at the listing. That could be a mistake, right? Possibly. Businesses stay active for different reasons, but combined with what you heard, I wouldn't assume anything. He clicked through publicly available filings. Nothing dramatic appeared, no giant judgment, no secret fortune, just enough to establish that Joseph's version of the company had not been complete. What should I do? Daniel folded his hands. Before you decide whether to marry him. Yes. Ask him. I blinked. That's it. Ask him directly. Give him the opportunity to tell you the truth. And if he lies, Daniel looked at me. Then your problem isn't $186,000. I understood. Before leaving, I asked one more question. If I cancel the wedding, what happens financially? You'll lose deposits. I know. Some vendors may refund part of them, some won't. You'll have to deal with gifts travel guests. It'll be unpleasant. That's all. Daniel gave me a tired smile. Victoria people survive canceled weddings every day. Bad marriages are usually more expensive. Outside his office, I sat in my car for several minutes. Then I called Claire. Finding her number had not been difficult. Joseph had kept it in an old emergency contact document because they still had unresolved business matters. She answered cautiously. Hello, Claire? Yes. This is Victoria. Silence. Not confusion. Recognition. Joseph's Victoria. The phrasing bothered me. Yes. Another pause. What do you want? I tightened my grip on the steering wheel. Is Joseph in financial trouble? Her answer came carefully. You should ask Joseph. I did. That was not technically true yet, but I continued. He hasn't been honest with me. Claire sighed. I don't want to be involved in your relationship. Neither do I. I just need to know whether I'm about to marry into something I don't understand. She was silent long enough that I thought she might hang up. Finally, she said, Then don't marry him until you understand it. Claire, I mean that. Her voice softened, but only slightly. Whatever he tells you, get documents. Don't accept explanations instead of documents. Then she ended the call. No dramatic confession. No alliance. But I had my answer anyway. That evening, Joseph came home carrying takeout from my favorite Thai restaurant. He seemed happy. We are officially done with work until after Charleston. He placed the bags on the counter. Tomorrow we rehearse. Saturday we get married. Sunday I turn my phone off. I watched him unpack dinner. This was the man I loved. That truth had not disappeared. I wished it had. Hatred would have made everything simpler. Instead, I helped him set the table. Halfway through dinner, I put down my fork. Joseph. He looked up. I need to ask you something before we get married. His expression changed just enough to tell me he understood the seriousness. Okay. Is there anything financial you haven't told me? He stared at me. I continued. Debt, business obligations, anything involving Claire. For perhaps 2 seconds, Joseph said nothing. Then he leaned back. No. One word. Clean. Certain. I felt something inside me settle. Not break. Settle. Nothing. No. What about the old company? Victoria that was handled years ago. And Claire. His eyebrows pulled together. Claire and I are finished. You know that. I held his gaze. He reached across the table. Where is this coming from? I looked at his hand but did not take it. I need you to answer me honestly. I am. Are you? His face tightened. Yes. There it was. His opportunity. I had given it to him without accusation, without mentioning the recorder, without telling him what I knew. He could have said he was scared. He could have admitted the debt. He could have told me he had planned to ask for help. I might still have canceled the wedding. But at least we would have been standing inside the same reality. Instead, Joseph smiled gently. You're exhausted. Wedding nerves are getting to both of us. Then he reached for my hand again. This time I moved it into my lap. Joseph noticed. Neither of us mentioned it. After dinner, he went upstairs to call his brother about the rehearsal. I remained at the table. At 8:36 p.m., I called our wedding coordinator. Melissa, it's Victoria. Hey, everything, okay? I looked at the staircase. No? Her voice immediately became professional. What do you need? I need you to keep something confidential tonight. Of course. I took one slow breath. There isn't going to be a wedding on Saturday. Silence. Then she asked quietly, Are you certain? I thought about the question I had asked Joseph less than 20 minutes earlier. I thought about how calmly he had lied. Yes, I said. For the first time in 2 days, my voice did not shake. I'm certain. I woke at 5:42 Saturday morning without an alarm. For several seconds, I lay still and watched pale morning light gather around the curtains. The house was silent. Joseph had spent the night at his brother's place because his mother insisted we preserve at least one wedding tradition. Under different circumstances, I would have smiled at that. Instead, I turned my head toward the guest room. My wedding dress was hanging behind that door. By 4 o'clock that afternoon, I was supposed to be wearing it. At 6:05, I made coffee. At 6:20, I called my mother. She answered immediately. You're awake early. Mom, the wedding is canceled. Silence. Then very softly, Are you safe? That question almost undid me. Yes, did Joseph hurt you? Not physically. I told her enough to make her understand the debt, the house, the conversation I had recorded. Most importantly, the lie he had told when I gave him a direct opportunity to come clean. My mother did not tell me what to do. She only said I'll be there in 20 minutes. Next, I called my closest friend Rebecca, then Melissa, the wedding coordinator. Melissa had already prepared a short message for the guests. Due to unforeseen personal circumstances, today's ceremony will not take place. We apologize for the late notice and appreciate your understanding. No accusations, no public humiliation, no details. I approved it. By 7, messages started going out. Some guests were already in Charlotte. My aunt had flown in from Ohio. Joseph's cousin had driven 6 hours with 2 children. Deposits would be lost. Food had been ordered. Flowers were already arranged. I knew all of that. I also knew none of it was a reason to become someone's wife. At 7:16, Joseph called. I watched his name flash across my screen. I let it ring. At 7:19, he called again. At 7:22, a text arrived. Bot, what did you do? 30 seconds later. Victoria, call me now. I turned the phone face down. My mother arrived just before 7:30. She came through the kitchen door without knocking, still wearing the cardigan she usually wore over her pajamas. She looked at me then at the untouched wedding dress visible through the guest room doorway. Oh, honey. I shook my head. Please don't. She understood. No comforting speech. No telling me everything happened for a reason. She simply poured herself coffee and sat beside me. At 7:48, tires hit the driveway. My mother looked toward the window. Is that him? Yes. Joseph did not knock gently. Victoria. I walked to the front door but left it locked. Open the door. We can talk here. His face through the glass was unlike any expression I had seen from him before. Angry, frightened, humiliated. You canceled our wedding. Yes. Without talking to me. I talked to you last night. His forehead creased. What are you talking about? I asked you if there was anything financial you hadn't told me. He stared at me. I asked about debt. I asked about Claire. Something shifted behind his eyes, small, but unmistakable. I opened the door and stepped onto the porch, closing it behind me. Joseph lowered his voice. Whatever you think you know, we should discuss it privately. We are. Not on your front porch. My mother is inside. You're not coming in. That hurt him. I saw it. Victoria, this is insane. People are already here. My mother is hysterical. My brother has 50 messages. Melissa won't tell me anything. I'm sorry people were inconvenienced. Inconvenienced. His voice rose. We spent months planning this. I know. We spent thousands of dollars. I know. You don't cancel a wedding 2 hours before people start getting ready because you're nervous. This isn't nerves. Then what is it? I looked directly at him. $186,000. Joseph stopped moving. For the first time that morning, the anger disappeared from his face. I continued. Baker Commercial Holdings. He swallowed. Victoria. And I know what you plan to use as collateral. His eyes narrowed. Did Claire call you? Interesting. Not, what are you talking about? Not, that's ridiculous. Claire. I folded my arms. This isn't about Claire. That woman has spent 6 years trying to punish me. She didn't make you lie to me last night. I didn't lie. You told me the company was handled. It is being handled. That isn't what you said. Joseph dragged a hand across his face. You don't understand the situation. Then explain it. He looked toward the street as though checking whether a neighbor was watching. The company had an old loan. There were personal guarantees. We were negotiating a settlement. Me and Claire. And you owe $186,000, potentially. I almost laughed. Potentially, it's complicated. Was my house part of your solution? He did not answer. Joseph, I was going to talk to you. When, after the honeymoon. The precision of that answer stunned me. Not someday. After the honeymoon. So after I married you. He exhaled. Yes, because we'd be married. We'd sit down together and figure out what made sense for us. For us, I wasn't taking your house. You planned to ask me to secure your debt with it. Ask you, exactly. His voice sharpened. I couldn't do anything without your consent. That was almost exactly what Daniel had explained. And Joseph was using it as a defense. You're right, I said. He seemed surprised. You needed my consent. Yes. So why didn't you ask me before the wedding? Silence. I stepped closer. Why wait? I didn't want this hanging over the ceremony. No, you didn't want to hear me say no while saying no was still easy. That isn't fair. I heard you. His face changed. This time there was no hiding it. What? I heard what you said to Claire. Joseph stared at me. I did not explain the recorder. Not yet. I simply repeated his words. Once we're married, she won't walk away over paperwork. The color drained from his face. Victoria, you were counting on the marriage. No, you were counting on me feeling trapped by it. I love you. I believe you. That stopped him. Because I meant it. I believed Joseph loved me. I also believed he had convinced himself that loving me gave him the right to manipulate when I learned the truth. I was trying to protect our future, he said. No, you were protecting yourself from my answer. His jaw tightened. You're throwing away 3 years over money. I shook my head. No. I opened the door, reached inside, and picked up the small velvet box I had left on the entry table. I removed the ring. Joseph watched me place it on the little table beside the porch swing. You threw away 3 years when I asked you the truth last night, and you looked me in the eye and lied. He stared at the ring. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he said, quieter, now don't do this. I put my hand on the doorknob. I already did. Victoria. I looked at him one final time. You thought becoming your wife would make it harder for me to protect myself. I opened the door. You were right. Joseph's expression changed. But you waited 2 days too long. I stepped inside and closed the door. My mother was standing in the kitchen. She did not ask what happened. Outside, Joseph remained on the porch for almost 5 minutes. Then his SUV backed slowly out of my driveway. At 4 o'clock that afternoon, the exact hour I was supposed to walk down the aisle, I was sitting at my kitchen table returning wedding gifts. I wasn't celebrating. I didn't feel victorious. But when the clock passed 4 and nothing irreversible happened, I finally understood something. I had lost a wedding. I had not lost my life. By Sunday morning, everyone knew there had been no wedding. Most people did not know why. That difference lasted about 12 hours. I had told my mother and Rebecca what happened. Joseph had apparently told his brother some version of it. And from there, the story spread through his family with the efficiency of a fire moving through dry grass. By Sunday afternoon, my phone had become something I avoided looking at. Some messages were kind. Thinking of you. No need to explain anything. Others were curious in ways disguised as concern. Are you sure you didn't act too quickly? And then there was Joseph's younger sister, Amanda. She called shortly after 3. I almost let it go to voicemail, but I answered because I had known her for 3 years and believed she deserved at least a conversation. Victoria, what happened? I think Joseph should explain it to you. He did. That told me immediately where the conversation was going. Amanda continued. He said you found out about an old business debt and canceled the entire wedding. That's part of it. Everyone has debt. Not everyone hides $186,000 from the person they're about to marry. He was going to tell you, after the wedding. There was a pause. Then she said marriage means helping each other. I walked to the kitchen window. The flowers from the venue had been delivered to a nursing home at my request. I could still see one forgotten centerpiece on my counter, white roses arranged around eucalyptus. I agree, I said. Amanda sounded surprised. You do? Completely. Helping someone you love is part of marriage. Then I don't understand. Helping someone isn't the same as being tricked into rescuing them. Her voice hardened. No one was tricking you. Joseph specifically waited because he thought I'd be less likely to refuse after we were married. According to Claire. According to Joseph. That ended the argument. Amanda was silent. I did not tell her about the recorder. I did not need to. I'm sorry you're hurting, I said. I know he's your brother. He loves you. I know. Then how can you do this? I looked at the wedding centerpiece. Because love wasn't the question. We ended the call politely. That surprised me. I had expected shouting accusations, maybe threats. Instead, the aftermath was mostly paperwork and disappointment. The venue kept a large portion of the deposit. The photographer refunded half. The florist refunded nothing because the arrangements were already complete. I mailed gifts back with handwritten notes. I reimbursed my aunt for part of her airfare even though she insisted I didn't have to. Every returned box felt like admitting publicly that I had failed at something. That feeling lasted longer than I expected. On Tuesday, I took the wedding dress from the guest room and moved it into the back of my closet because I could no longer stand seeing it every time I passed the open door. Then I went to work. That was almost worse. People tried too hard not to look at me. My assistant Carla left coffee on my desk without mentioning the wedding. My supervisor stopped by and asked whether I needed more time off. No, I said, I need spreadsheets. He laughed carefully. Spreadsheets I can provide. For 8 hours I answered emails and reviewed shipping reports. Ordinary work felt medicinal. Joseph contacted me twice that week. The first message was angry. You should have given me a chance to explain before humiliating both of us. I did not respond. The second arrived 2 days later. I know I should have told you sooner. I was scared. Can we please talk? I did not respond to that one either. A week after the cancelled wedding, Claire called. I was sitting on my back porch after dinner when her name appeared. I almost ignored it. Then I answered. Hello, Victoria. Her voice was different from our first conversation, less guarded. I heard you didn't marry him. No, I'm sorry. I gave a small laugh. That's an unusual response. I don't mean I'm sorry you cancelled it, I figured. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then Claire said, there's something you should understand about Joseph. I leaned back in my chair. I'm listening. He doesn't think he's using people. That was not what I expected. Claire continued. When we were married, he started that company with a partner. At first it did well, then projects went bad, cash flow got tight. She paused. Joseph brought papers home. He told me they were routine guarantees, temporary. He said married people took risks together. You signed them? Yes. Her answer was quiet. I trusted him. The words sat between us. What happened? The business survived longer than the marriage. There was no bitterness in her tone anymore, just fatigue. After we separated, I learned there were obligations I hadn't understood. Lawyers eventually sorted out most of it, but not everything. This current debt is part of what remained tangled. Why were you meeting him? He wanted me to sign a restructuring agreement. And you refused. Yes, it shifted more exposure toward me. I thought about the recording. You told him what he was doing to me was rotten. Claire was silent. Then she asked, you heard that? Yes. I did not explain further. She exhaled. Joseph has a way of treating somebody else's sacrifice like it's already available to him. That sentence stayed with me. He doesn't think he's stealing, she continued. He thinks if you love him, your resources belong to the problem. I looked through the screen porch toward the maple tree in my yard. Did you love him? Very much. So did I. I know. There was something strangely comforting about hearing that from her. Not because we were suddenly friends. We weren't. But Claire was the first person who understood that leaving Joseph did not require me to pretend the previous 3 years had been fake. He could be generous, funny, patient, loving, and still be dangerous to build a financial life with. Those truths could exist together. 3 weeks later, an envelope arrived. Joseph's handwriting was on the front. I left it unopened on the kitchen counter until after dinner. The letter was 4 pages long. He apologized without excuses for the first page. On the second, the excuses appeared. He had been ashamed of the debt. He had believed he could solve it before telling me. He had feared I would see him differently. Then near the end, he wrote something that made me stop. I kept telling myself I was protecting our future. The truth is, I was protecting myself from hearing you say no. I read that sentence twice. For the first time, Joseph had named what he had done accurately. He wrote that he had begun counseling. He said he was negotiating directly with the lender and selling an investment property to cover part of the obligation. He asked for one conversation. I folded the letter. For an hour, I considered calling him. Not because I wanted the wedding back, because I missed him. That was the part nobody tells you about making the right decision. Sometimes the right decision still leaves an empty chair at the table. I put the letter in a drawer. I did not call. Joseph's willingness to change mattered. But it no longer required my participation. I had spent 3 years loving him. I did not need to spend a fourth proving that leaving had been justified. 6 months after I canceled my wedding, I finally took the dress out of my closet. It was a Saturday morning in October, cool enough that I had opened the kitchen windows while I drank my coffee. The maple tree in my front yard had started turning and dry leaves scraped softly across the driveway whenever the wind picked up. Nothing dramatic had happened that morning. That was what made it important. For months, the dress had remained sealed inside its garment bag behind winter coats and boxes of shoes. I knew it was there every time I opened the closet, but I had stopped looking directly at it. That morning I looked. Then I pulled it out. I laid the dress across my bed and ran my hand over the fabric. It was still beautiful. For a while that bothered me. I think some part of me wanted everything connected to Joseph to become ugly after what happened. It would have been easier if every memory had changed shape the moment I learned the truth. But life rarely gives us that kind of simplicity. The dress was beautiful. Our 3 years together had contained beautiful moments, and canceling the wedding had still been the right decision. By then I had heard enough through mutual friends to know that Joseph's life had changed. He sold a small investment property he owned outside Gastonia. He moved from his 2-bedroom apartment into something smaller. He reached an agreement concerning part of the business debt and apparently continued seeing a counselor. Rebecca once asked whether knowing that made me feel vindicated. It didn't. Joseph struggling financially did not improve my life. Joseph's suffering did not restore my trust. I had never wanted revenge. I had wanted the truth before I made a permanent decision. I had received it with less than 2 days to spare. There were evenings when I still missed him. Usually ordinary evenings, that surprised me most. I did not miss Joseph when I attended weddings or saw engagement announcements online. I missed him when something ridiculous happened at work, and I instinctively reached for my phone because he would have understood why it was funny. I missed him the first time temperatures dropped because he always complained that I turned the heat on too early. Once at the grocery store, I automatically picked up the coffee he preferred. I stood there holding the bag for several seconds before putting it back. Healing, I discovered, was made of moments like that. Not grand declarations, small corrections. One habit at a time. I never spoke to Claire again after our last conversation, but I thought about something she had told me. He thinks if you love him, your resources belong to the problem. For months I examined that sentence. Joseph's greatest flaw had not been greed in the obvious sense. He had not plotted to steal my deed or forge my signature. He knew he needed my permission. What he had tried to manipulate was the timing of that permission. That distinction mattered. He wanted to wait until after the ceremony, after the vows, after our families had watched us promise permanence, because he believed the emotional cost of saying no would then be higher. Maybe I would have helped him if he had told me 6 months earlier. I still don't know. I might have. I loved him. But helping someone because you understand the risk and freely choose it is generosity. Helping because someone deliberately withheld information until refusing became harder is something else. At 43, I finally understood the difference. I also had to confront my own decision to record him. I am not proud of that. If I could return to that week with everything I know now, I would like to believe I would sit across from Joseph sooner and say, "Something is wrong." Until I understand what it is, there will be no wedding. Maybe that would have been healthier. Maybe he would have confessed. Or maybe he would have lied exactly as he did when I eventually asked him directly. I'll never know. What I do know is that discovering the truth did not make the way I discovered it automatically admirable. Adults can hold 2 uncomfortable facts at once. I crossed a boundary, and what I heard revealed a betrayal I could not ignore. By October, I was ready to stop living emotionally inside that final week before the wedding. So I took the dress to a consignment boutique. The woman behind the counter was probably in her late 50s. She examined the gown carefully, checking the hem and beadwork. "This has never been worn." "No." She glanced at me. "Changed your mind?" There were a dozen answers I could have given her. Instead, I smiled. "Just in time." She smiled back without asking another question. I walked out carrying an empty garment bag. The bag weighed almost nothing. I sat in my car afterward and realized I felt no urge to cry. That surprised me. 6 months earlier, I had believed the canceled wedding would become the defining humiliation of my life. It didn't. Most people stopped talking about it within weeks. My coworkers moved on. My family moved on. Even Joseph's relatives eventually stopped contacting me. The catastrophe I had imagined becoming permanent slowly became something that had simply happened. And maybe that is what I would tell any woman or man listening to this who has discovered something terrible right before a wedding retirement move anniversary, or any other milestone that seems too big to interrupt. Money already spent is gone. Guests already invited will recover. People may gossip. Families may be angry. There will always be someone telling you that you've gone too far because turning around inconveniences everyone else. But inconvenience is not a reason to surrender informed consent over the rest of your life. 3 days before my wedding, I hid a recorder in Joseph's coat because I was terrified I would discover he was cheating. I didn't. What I discovered was worse for me. He wasn't planning to leave me for another woman. He was counting on me becoming his wife so I would stop protecting myself. One sentence exposed it. Once we're married, she won't walk away over paperwork. He was wrong about one thing. I did walk away. Not because I stopped loving him overnight. Not because I wanted to punish him. I walked away because love without honesty eventually becomes leverage, and I refused to build a marriage on leverage. That Saturday I lost a wedding, but I kept my home. I kept my choices. And most importantly, I kept the years of my life that would have come afterward. If this story made you think about a moment when your instincts were trying to tell you something, I'd like to hear about it. Tell me in the comments what you would have done in my place and where you're listening from. And if stories about ordinary people facing extraordinary choices mean something to you, subscribe and stay with us. There are many more stories to share, and sometimes someone else's experience gives us the courage to look more closely at our own.